A millionaire comes home. Late, and his maid tells him to keep quiet. The reason will surprise you. The dashboard clock glowed 2:16 a.m. when Ricardo Alves parked in front of his house. The mansion, imposing and silent, looked even colder under the dim glow of the streetlights. He turned off the engine and sat for a few seconds in the car, his fingers still on the wheel, his eyes lost in nothingness. He was coming from a gala, one of those full of stiff smiles, empty compliments, and people who talked a lot but said very little. For the first time in a long while, he left in the middle. An impulse, something pressing from the inside. A restlessness he couldn't name. He only knew he had to go back. And stranger still, he felt he wasn't coming back home, but to something he had left behind without realizing it. As he passed through the gate, one detail struck him, a light on upstairs. The window of Mateus's room let out a faint yellow strip into the darkness. The housekeeper was methodical, and the household routine strict. All the lights were out by midnight. This didn't make sense. Ricardo entered with slow steps, guided only by the faint glow of the staircase. Silence was absolute. No TV noises, no sounds from the kitchen, only the soft creak of the wood beneath his shoes. A chill ran down his spine. Something was wrong, not danger, but absence. As he went up, he heard footsteps, light, uneven, like someone wandering without purpose. When he reached the hallway, he saw Carla standing in front of Mateus's room. She was barefoot, her face tense, her eyes fixed on the dimness beyond. She turned slowly when she noticed him. She brought a finger to her lips, asking for silence, like someone guarding a secret too fragile to be broken by words. Ricardo took 2 more steps, and then he saw him. Mateus was walking in the hallway, slowly, as if his feet floated above the floor. His arms hung at his sides, his pajamas wrinkled, his eyes open but unfocused. It was like watching someone walking inside a dream. Ricardo froze, tried to understand. Was he awake, playing? But before he could react, the boy turned toward the staircase. Time slowed down. Mateus was only a few steps from the first stair. His small feet touched the edge. His body leaned slightly forward. 1 second more, and he would have fallen. It was Carla who moved first. With precise agility, she grabbed the boy by the waist and pulled him back from the edge as if she had done it before. And indeed, she had. Carefully, she led Mateus back to his room. He didn't resist. He lay down on the bed without a word. Within moments, he was deeply asleep, as if nothing had happened. Ricardo entered the room in silence. He watched his son lying there, serene. The child's face contrasted with the invisible weight he seemed to carry even in sleep. Carla said little. She didn't need to. This wasn't the first time. In fact, it happened almost every night. Mateus had recurring episodes of sleepwalking. He would wander through the house, often approaching the stairs. Sometimes he called for someone, other times he just roamed. No one but her knew. The nanny, hired to care for the boy, disappeared as soon as it got dark. She made excuses. Said it was normal, that it would pass with time. In her daily reports, she pretended everything was under control, but the truth was simple. She vanished. And Carla, even off duty, even when it wasn't her job, stayed. She kept watch over Mateus's sleep, like someone guarding hope. Ricardo said nothing. He just sat in the armchair by the bed, not knowing what to do with his hands, or with his guilt. He looked at his son and tried to remember the last time he had been there, in that room with time to listen to anything other than a practical request or a school note. The boy slept with his arms curled up, as if protecting himself from something invisible. His breathing was light but uneven, and in the middle of that silence, Ricardo felt something break inside him. Reality hit brutally. While he lost himself in meetings, contracts, dinners, and events, Mateus was getting lost inside his own home. Literally, searching for someone who was never there. The boy walked in his sleep because, awake, he no longer found anyone. Absence wasn't measured in days away, but in holes torn open in time. Ricardo now realized he no longer knew his son. He didn't know his fears, his likes, his small joys. The boy had grown up in the shadow of a promise that his father was doing it all for him. But Mateus didn't want gifts or trips, or expensive toys. He only wanted someone to hold his hand when the dark came. Carla left the room in silence, as she did every night. But now Ricardo knew. And what he would do with that, no one could decide for him. He stayed there, his elbows resting on his knees, watching the boy sleep. His wrinkled suit, his face marked by the night, his heart too heavy for a man used to controlling everything. Nothing had prepared him to face his son like a stranger. Nothing had warned him that while he was piling up achievements, he was losing what mattered most. That night the mansion felt emptier than ever, and even surrounded by everything, Ricardo realized he had lost the essential. And worse, only now he was beginning to understand how much it hurt. Morning came, but Ricardo didn't sleep. He remained in the same armchair the whole night, watching his son's breathing. At times, Mateus mumbled incoherent words, shifted slightly, furrowed his brow as if trying to escape something that gave him no peace, even in sleep. Ricardo only stood when the first ray of sunlight crossed the curtain. He left the room slowly, without making a sound. In the hallway, the mansion looked like a stage after the show, perfect on the outside, but heavy inside. In the kitchen, he found Carla already preparing coffee. Her face showed no surprise. It was as if she knew he'd come through there earlier than ever. Without exchanging words, they sat down. She placed a cup in front of him. Ricardo didn't touch it right away. He just looked at the hot liquid as if staring into a mirror. The silence lasted several minutes, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was necessary. When he finally spoke, his voice came out low without the authoritative tone he usually carried. He said he didn't know, that he had never imagined, that he thought he was doing the right thing, that he gave his son everything he needed, a bilingual school, imported toys, health insurance, expensive outings, the full package of modern fatherhood, but now all of it sounded ridiculous. Carla listened silently. When she replied, she did so calmly, as if in no rush to wound, but also with no fear of being clear. She said Mateus didn't need anything else, except him. She told him how, on quiet nights, the boy wandered through the house, as if looking for someone. Sometimes he would call, "Daddy?" softly, as if testing whether it was safe to call. Other times, he would simply sit on the floor in the hallway and stay there until he fell asleep against the wall. Those were the moments when she began staying around, at first by instinct, later by affection. She also told him how the boy seemed more and more withdrawn, how he stopped drawing, running, laughing out loud, how he hid small things, notes, drawings, broken toys, in secret places, as if keeping memories of safer times. Ricardo listened to every word like someone gathering shards. There was no defense, no excuses, only the harsh reality of a father who had outsourced everything, even affection. But then something unexpected happened. Carla said she had seen it before, not with Mateus, but with herself, in childhood. She said she grew up in a house much the same, beautiful on the outside, silent on the inside. Her mother worked too much. She was a strong, respected woman, but absent. Only in her case, there was no Carla, no one to care, to hold, to listen. She learned to manage on her own, and to stop expecting anyone. For a long time, she thought it was normal, that it was the price of having a successful mother. She only understood the damage years later, when she realized she confused presence with obligation and affection with assistance. Seeing Mateus, she saw herself, and that's why she didn't have the heart to ignore him. As she spoke, Ricardo kept his eyes fixed on the table. Every word seemed to dig into a part of him that had been dormant for years, an empty pride, sustained by achievements that now seemed meaningless. Finally, he asked, almost voiceless, "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Carla replied with a look that spoke for her, "Because you never asked." The phrase wasn't cruel, it was a statement. In Ricardo's world, problems were solved with payments, bonuses, and hires. Everything could be delegated, everything except what truly mattered. He spent years managing companies, but didn't know when his son went to sleep. He knew the bank account number, but not the name of Mateus's best friend. He knew how to negotiate contracts with multinationals, but didn't recognize the sound of his own son calling for him in the middle of the night. They fell silent again, The sun climbed outside, tinting the kitchen wall gold. The house was beginning to wake up, but there, in that small space between two people broken in different ways, something more important had awakened. Ricardo stood up slowly. Before leaving, he turned to Carla. She didn't expect apologies. She didn't want promises. But in that look there was something different. A weariness, yes, but also a beginning. Because at that moment, Ricardo Alves realized the silence of the house wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the echo of everything he had failed to be. And now finally he was beginning to listen. That was the first time in many years that Ricardo cancelled all of his day's appointments. He turned off his phone, ignored meetings, asked that no one look for him. He spent the morning walking through the house as if exploring forgotten territory. He looked at the paintings on the wall with new eyes, entered rooms he hadn't stepped into for months, opened drawers, found Mateus's school papers he had never read, invitations to performances he had ignored, little notes written in tiny letters, colored with love, forgotten among bills and receipts. Each discovery was a wound, small but deep, as if the entire house were a map of the absences he had tried to ignore for years. By late afternoon, he went to the office. There, everything still breathed the man he used to be. Dark wood furniture, shelves filled with technical books, framed diplomas, stacks of contracts, corporate photos with rehearsed smiles. He sat in the leather chair and stared at his own reflection in the glass of the bookcase. He no longer saw himself the same way. The image reflected was of a successful man, bankrupt in the things that really mattered. The hours passed slowly. When night fell, Ricardo was still there, motionless, alone. The silence of the house now had weight. It was almost physical, not just the absence of sound, but the presence of everything that had never been said. And then it happened. A soft sound broke the emptiness, light footsteps in the hallway. Ricardo turned. The door opened slowly. Mateus came in. He was in pajamas, hair messy, eyes open, but vacant. He walked slowly, just like the night before, sleepwalking. This time, though, he didn't go to the hallway, nor toward the stairs. He went straight to the office. Ricardo froze. The boy stopped in front of him, stretched out his arms, touched his father's jacket with his fingertips, as if to make sure he was real. And then he hugged him. Without a word, without hesitation. That hug had no logic, no time, needed no explanation. It was instinct, it was love, it was longing, accumulated and silent. Ricardo felt his son's body pressed against him, fragile and warm. The small arms held him tightly. For an instant, he wanted to believe the boy was awake, that he knew what he was doing, but it didn't matter, because even in his sleep, Mateus was looking for his father, and he found him. "You came back," the boy murmured in a thread of voice barely holding itself. The tone wasn't surprise, it was relief. Moments later, he fell asleep in Ricardo's arms, as if finally able to rest. Ricardo carried him carefully back to his room, eyes brimming with tears. He covered him with a light blanket, fixed the pillow, and before turning off the light, noticed something strange under the bed. He bent down. It was a shoebox, decorated with children's stickers, hidden, pushed against the wall. Ricardo pulled it out carefully. When he opened it, he found dozens of folded papers, colorful drawings, bits of ribbon, small notes, drawings of a house, of a family, of a father. In most of them, the male figure appeared distant, small, sometimes with his back turned, other times on a plane, always out of reach. But what destroyed him was a piece of paper folded several times. On it, written in crooked letters, was a question. "If I'm good, will Daddy come back?" That sentence cut through Ricardo like a blade. There was nothing left to say, not even to himself. That child spent nights wandering through his own house, sleepwalking, drawing, asking the emptiness what he never had the courage to say awake. And even so, he loved him. Mateus's silent forgiveness, that hug in the office, the way he surrendered into his father's arms, was what hurt most, because it showed there was still time, but not much. Ricardo put the box back where it was, turned off the bedroom light, stayed one more minute at the door watching his son sleep. In the dark, He promised in silence, "This will not happen again." That night, the cold executive everyone knew began to crumble. In his place, something new was being born. Still confused, still fragile but real. The sky was still grey when Ricardo walked into the kitchen. He hadn't slept. He had spent the night awake, reliving every memory, every absence, every silence that had filled the past years of his life. Now he was trying to make pancakes. He had never even fried an egg. The kitchen was not a familiar, much less comfortable place, but he insisted. With clumsy hands, he mixed the batter in a bowl, spilling flour on the counter and burning the first attempt in the pan. The smell of scorched batter filled the room, but he kept going. It wasn't about getting the recipe right. It was about being there. Carla appeared a little later, surprised. She found an unprecedented scene. Ricardo, in an improvised apron, still wearing the wrinkled dress shirt from the night before, and a lighter expression on his face than she had ever seen. He didn't ask for help, but he didn't try to pretend he knew what he was doing either. When he turned to her, his eyes said everything. Carla approached slowly, waited for him to say something. Ricardo took a deep breath, as if preparing to take a step both difficult and necessary. He said he wanted to change, that he needed to, in fact, but that he didn't know how to do it alone. Carla listened, and for the first time, she didn't see the boss. She saw the father, a man willing to relearn. But she was firm. She said she would help, yes, with one condition, that he not fake it, that he not turn guilt into routine, that he not buy his own redemption with empty gestures. She said Mateus didn't need a hero, just a real father, present, patient, human. Ricardo nodded. There was no room left for masks. That very morning, he called the nanny. The woman's cheerful voice came from the other end, asking if the boy had slept well. The reply was dry. Ricardo said he knew everything, about the disappearances, the lies, the absent nights, and without raising his voice, he told her she was dismissed, effective immediately. The call lasted less than a minute. Carla, watching from the kitchen, only nodded, as if in approval. Nothing more needed to be said. Mateus woke up a little later, hair tousled, eyes still heavy with sleep. He found his father in the kitchen, something that had never happened before. Ricardo called him with a timid smile, showed him the badly made pancakes, said they were practice ones but that he wanted to share them with him. The boy approached slowly, cautious but curious, sat at the table, took a bite, made a face, laughed, then took another bite. Ricardo smiled too. That simple, spontaneous laugh was more valuable than any figure in the profit reports. Little by little, the once silent table filled up, first with shy laughs, then with short stories, simple questions. A light conversation, almost forgotten between the two. Carla watched from a distance, preparing the juice. She didn't want to intrude. That moment was theirs, but she knew with the certainty of someone who had lived silence that something had truly changed. Later, Ricardo went to his son's room, helped tidy up the toys, found out there was a late school project, a model he had been working on alone because Daddy was always busy. This time, it was different. They spent the afternoon together, gluing pieces, drawing, laughing at mistakes, mismeasuring, starting over. Slowly, Ricardo began to discover who this little human being was, the one he claimed to love, but barely knew. And Mateus, in turn, began to believe that his father wasn't just a voice on the phone or a shadow in a suit passing through the hallway. He was someone who knew how to glue paper and laugh. And who was there when he looked to his side? At the end of the day, Carla brought lemonade for the two of them. As she handed it over, Ricardo called her aside. He said he didn't want her to be just the household employee anymore. He wanted her to stay, but as part of the rebuilding, as someone who, even without obligations, chose to protect what he himself had neglected. Carla hesitated, said she wasn't a nanny, nor a substitute. Ricardo understood. She wasn't. She was the bridge between what the house had been and what it could become. And she was willing to help, as long as he did his part as a father. That night, the mansion no longer felt cold. It wasn't just a lit-up house. It was a home under construction. For the first time in a long time, Mateus slept without getting up. without wandering the halls, without calling for anyone, because he knew, even if he didn't say it out loud, that someone was there now and would stay. Leave a like and subscribe, not for me, but for the next story that will remind you of what really matters.